Student-dependent apartments falling in price. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your coffee and let's have a look at this article from Domain discussing property prices in university suburbs tipped to keep falling. And, you know, we've been discussing this for some time, just the university-dependent suburbs where, well, apartments prices essentially are going to start falling. Remember we were looking at the universities in Tasmania where they were cutting courses and they were cutting staff. And some of those staff had invested all of their money in student accommodation. So not only was their profession tied to international students, their investments that were meant to provide a buffer were also tied to the same thing. So you've got to think about it when you're investing in property as a way to get a passive income stream to kind of see you through tough times or to grow your wealth. You don't want it on the back of the other sector that you're completely dependent on. Isn't, you know, don't we want to have diversity in our investments? So I can't say I'm at all surprised. There's been talk of this for some time. And while there does seem to be some energy in the housing sector, a lot of people are managing to save money now, and it wouldn't take much to give a bit of a juice to the market, particularly with all everything the government is throwing at it. Would you be looking at buying an investment apartment targeting international students? Because some of these complexes, guys, some of them, they're like set up completely just for international students or just for students at the university. It's not like you could buy one and live in it as a first home unless you're a student. Then you still have to pay all the, well, quite onerous fees and charges. You know, all the body corporate fees, all these other costs, and then you're expected to tear it all out and refurbish it. So yeah, it's an expensive prospect. So apartment prices in suburbs that rely heavily on university students could feel downward pressure for some time after recording steep falls in 2020, property analysts say. Domain's latest house price report shows many of the biggest falls in unit prices over the 12 months to December 2020 were in suburbs that typically attracted large numbers of international students who want to live close to campus. Suburbs close to university, including Baldwick and Carlton, saw median unit prices fall by 26.7% and 20.5% respectively. In Clayton near Monash University, house prices fell by 11.1% and units by 5.9%. Well, see, some of these houses would be, I remember there was one gentleman we worked for, he was lifting up his house and he was just filling it up underneath with these bedrooms and little en-suites just to cram full of students. You know, good way to make money. So, with officials indicating international borders are unlikely to fully open this year, property experts warn that apartments geared to university students could experience further price falls in 2021. Even when international students can return to Australia, some experts believe it might be some time before apartment prices in some areas fully recover. Angie Zigomanis, Director, Research and Strategist at Charter Keck Kramer, says the speed with which these unit prices will recover will depend on how quickly Australia reopens its borders and whether universities will remain as reliant on international students for revenue. Well, our universities are very dependent on international students. And the other question is that's not been asked here is, will the international students actually want to return? Will they want to come back to Australia? One of the advantages that Australia has had is that we're cheaper than other countries. You know, I was always told at university that we're the poor man's United States. Well, right now we're sitting at nearly 80 cents. So we might be losing some of our market competitiveness to some of the better destinations around the world, better education, better quality. Sure, some people will want to use university as an opportunity to get into the country here in Australia, but I mean, you know, immigrate to Australia, pay a fortune for housing, your children will never be able to own a home. I know some people that have come over here and gone back. Better quality of life back home, everyone. So, if borders remain closed for another 12 months, the apartment market in some of those suburbs close to universities will remain challenged, he said. While the vacancy rates are so high, they are just not holding any appeal for investors. There is no demand for them. I mean, there's going to be a crash, guys, if this keeps going. These things are going to be worth it. You've got to pay to hold them. If you can't get anyone to rent it out, who's going to negative gear it? Mr. Zigomanis said the student apartment market could be further impacted long-term if international students don't return in large numbers when borders reopen. The recovery of that particular market depends on the speed with which international borders open up again, but also on the willingness or appetite for universities to take on international students at the same rate as they did pre-pandemic. I mean, the question is, what intervention will the government and the universities do to prop up this sector? University education is one of the biggest exports in our country. It's right up there, guys. It's huge. And so many of our students are dependent on so many of our universities are dependent on international students. They pay fees worth $10 billion in 2019. About a quarter of all universities' revenues, up from 10% in 2000, Commonwealth figures show. But with the global pandemic exposing the risks associated with such a heavy reliance on international students for revenue, and online education tipped to be a long-lasting effect of the pandemic, some fear that the demand for student apartments may never return to pre-COVID levels. I mean, they're expensive. These apartments are expensive. And they're tiny, guys. You can't really convert these little student apartments over to families. I mean, I guess you've got a whole lot of single people that could stay in them, but some of them are like glorified hotel rooms. You'd have like a communal kitchen there. Are these going to become the ghettos of the future, everyone? In the same way that remote working has driven growing numbers of city dwellers to make a tree change and commute to the office from regional Victoria once or twice a week, increasing numbers of students from regional Victoria are likely to choose to stay at home and commute to the city as more teaching is performed online. There is no question that changing models around teaching and remote learning may also impact demand for student apartments, Mr. Zigomanis said. Domain Senior Research Analyst Dr. Nicola Powell said apartment markets that are tied closely to universities are likely to be impacted long-term by domestic students who have already altered their decisions about where they may want to live since the pandemic. While some universities will always be an opportunity to fly the nest, there might be others who might now choose to go to university but stay at home and commute from the country when they need to, she said. I mean, it's also a way to save money, guys. You know, but it is an adventure. Going to university is an adventure. Dr. Powell says that as long as vacancy rates in areas such as Melbourne CBD, Clayton, near Monash University remain high, they will remain unattractive to investors and place downward pressure on prices. At the moment, we've got vacancy rates at 11.8% in Melbourne and 4.9% out in Monash, which are some of the highest in Greater Melbourne, the doctor said. We're also seeing some reduction in sale prices, which is reflecting that retreat in investor activity we saw in 2020 until we see the rental market in those areas return. Then investors are going to continue to be deterred from investing in those disrupted rental markets. I mean, these things aren't the honey pots that people thought. They're not just printing money. We'll have to see, guys, how in the next few months, if we start to see more of this stock flood the market. I mean, would you buy one? What discount would there have to be if you could buy a investment property where only international students could stay in, and you've got all the costs associated with it? I'm hashtag not sponsored, although I'd love to be. I mean, could it make sense to anyone? I guess if you're going to run a loss, and you're hoping that international education will come back, but will it come back to previous levels? I mean, it's crazy. However, or what if, you know, they start getting homeless people in there, or if they just start trying to rent it out to whoever they can? You've got to pay these costs to maintain these buildings. However, Dr. Powell is confident demand from international students will return once international borders reopen and drive recovery in those markets skewed towards students. So she's hoping that the demand for international students will come back. That'll be interesting to see. I mean, if it does, you get one in a bargain, it may be an opportunity. But, you know, that's what they say. It's always a tough time to catch the falling market. But then again, you want to be, isn't the saying, be brave when others are fearful? While I think we might see a bit of a change in sentiment from domestic students, I think once that flow of international students returns, those rental markets will snap back near to where they were, and vacancy rates will continue to decline from their peak. Dr. Powell said the lure of Australia will remain strong among international students once the pandemic is over, the vaccine has been rolled out, not just because of our great universities, but because the way the pandemic has been handled here has been world-class. Melbourne-based demographer Simon Kustenmacher from the demographics group also believes international students will drive a correction in price for student-focused apartments in the long term. Sooner or later, international students will come back to Melbourne because the demand for a high-quality English-speaking, in-person university experience is not going to shrink, while we've got those growth economies in Asia, he said. However, he says there is a significant short-term risk if international borders don't reopen in time and to replace the current crop of international students who are likely to upsize from student-style apartments or return home once they graduate in 2 or 3 years. As long as there is a global pandemic that stops people migrating across the world, those inner suburbs of Melbourne and those university-tied suburbs that are dependent on a constant refreshing of that student population remain a concern. Many apartments that are currently rented to international students could be empty in 3 years' time if new international students can't come in, and that will cause prices to plummet for those smaller 1 or 2 bedroom apartments. But we would see those price falls continue to just or confined to just those smaller apartments because demand for those larger apartments and houses, even in those university suburbs, are just growing and growing even in the pandemic. Geelong, home to Deakin University, is a good example of how the reduction in student population affects only certain portions of the market. Braden Tournier from Fresh Property Management in Geelong says while rental demand for homes in Geelong is going nuts due to increased migration, largely from Melbourne, demand for rooming houses which are large homes with up to 10 or 12 rooms and normally rented individually to students has plummeted. For normal housing, it's gone crazy. People are offering more rent and offering to pay for 4 to 6 months in advance because the competition is so high, he said. But with the student rooming houses, we're leasing rooms for $20 to $40 less per week than normal. Not only are there fewer international students, but the domestic students aren't willing to commit to a lease at the moment because they don't know how often they will actually be required to be on campus and how much learning will be online. He says the other long-term impact of the current pandemic is that investors will be more likely to diversify their investment portfolio and not just rely on one sector of the market, such as students, for their rental income. Well, that would seem very sensible. So what do you think, everyone? Do you think we will see a return of international students and a snapback of this sector? Or is it just starting its journey down in prices? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Would you buy one of these? Would you invest in one now if you're hoping it would come back? Explain why in the comments, guys. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and enjoy the content I find here, there's a few ways you can support us. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links from Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband. You can buy merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.